Welcome to AI Dispatch, your channel for the latest AI videos on YouTube. If you don't want to miss these updates, please like, subscribe, and share. Today's video comes from Stanford University School of Engineering. Joining us is Professor Chuck Easley. His research examines economic interventions that produce outcomes opposite to their design, technology blockades that accelerate rival innovation, advertising systems that fund misinformation, and optimization algorithms that systematically undermine their operators' stated goals. We will walk through his findings on semiconductor policy, digital ad economics, and algorithmic governance. Consider two scenarios that violate standard economic logic. First, you impose export controls to deny your competitor access to critical technology, and their domestic industry accelerates as a direct result. Second, you allocate billions in advertising spend while unknowingly financing the exact content you publicly oppose. Stanford professor Chuck Easley's research demonstrates that both scenarios are not hypothetical edge cases, but structural features of how modern markets operate. His data reveals that well-designed interventions frequently generate inverse outcomes because the systems they target operate on incentive structures that override stated policy intent. Start with the semiconductor export control regime. Standard reasoning holds that restricting a rival's access to advanced chips should delay their technological progress. The causal chain appears straightforward. Less access equals slower development. Easley's analysis shows this logic failed completely. When the United States implemented strict export controls on China, cutting off access to advanced semiconductor technology, it did not starve the Chinese industry. Instead, it created a guaranteed domestic market for Chinese entrepreneurs. Prior to the restrictions, Chinese startups could not compete against established American firms. Once the bans took effect, Chinese venture capitalists recognized an existential bottleneck that required immediate resolution. The result was a flood of domestic investment into the sector. The restrictions did not slow Chinese development. They accelerated it by removing foreign competition and creating urgent demand for local alternatives. The policy intended to prevent technological independence instead catalyzed it. The irony deepens when examining the domestic impact within the United States. The CHIPS Act allocated $53 billion in subsidies, ostensibly to ignite American semiconductor innovation. Easley's research indicates that this massive capital injection produced only a brief spike in venture capital activity. The subsidies flowed primarily to large incumbent firms with minimal spillover effects for startups. The contrast is stark. US policy inadvertently fueled a startup boom in China while failing to generate a sustained one domestically. Now shift to the information economy, where Easley redefines what misinformation platforms actually are. The prevailing assumption treats these sites as ideological weapons operated by political extremists. Society views them as propaganda outlets driven by conviction. Easley's framework strips away this narrative entirely. He describes most misinformation sites as arbitrage operations run by entrepreneurs who publish fabricated stories across the entire political spectrum purely to monetize attention. They are not ideologues. They are traders exploiting inefficiencies in the attention market. Their content has no political allegiance because their business model depends solely on click-through rates, not persuasion. This leads to a disturbing structural failure. One might assume that reputable corporations would never fund these operations. Easley's team found that over 80% of companies across industries place advertisements on misinformation websites. When his team surveyed executives, only about 20% believed their ads appeared on such sites. The actual rate was 4 times higher. Corporate leadership operates under a complete illusion regarding where their advertising capital flows. The mechanism driving this disconnect is algorithmic optimization. Machine learning ad systems are designed exclusively to minimize cost per click and maximize return on investment. Misinformation content is more sensational than factual reporting, which generates higher engagement. The AI therefore mechanically directs brand advertising toward fake news sites because it is mathematically the most efficient path to audience attention. The system is functioning exactly as designed, but the design objective cost efficiency conflicts with the advertiser's reputational and ethical goals. Easley estimates that for every $2.16 spent in the digital advertising economy, approximately $1 funds misinformation platforms. Corporate America has become the primary financial backer of the fake news ecosystem, not through intent, but through algorithmic delegation. The trust placed in optimization systems to reduce costs has resulted in those systems systematically funding the content advertisers publicly condemn. Finally, Easley presents a structural argument about governance itself. Traditional models assume that laws are created by legislators and enforced by regulatory agencies. Easley argues this framework no longer describes reality. Digital platforms now function as regulators. Algorithmic rules governing ad placement, search rankings, and content distribution operate identically to public policy. These systems determine which businesses succeed, which information circulates, and which actors gain visibility. When a platform adjusts its ranking algorithm to prioritize engagement, it effectively legislates the information economy. Regulation is no longer exclusively a state function. It has been distributed to private entities whose optimization targets often conflict with societal stability. Easley's analytical method is consistent across all three domains. He ignores stated intentions and examines raw incentive structures and mechanical outcomes. Export bans designed to slow rivals instead create investment urgency. Efficiency algorithms designed to save money instead fund disinformation. Optimization systems designed to improve performance instead produce systemic fragility. His work reveals that when policy goals conflict with the underlying incentive architecture of a system, the incentives win. The remaining question is whether our institutions can function effectively when every optimized intervention produces outcomes that contradict its design, or whether we require a fundamental redesign of how economic and regulatory systems are structured. If you're interested in the video featured in this episode, click the link below to watch the original.